morning. This lecture video is going to look at the male and female reproductive structures. So you can follow along in your diagram packet to label the different structures, and then we'll go over the basic function of each structure. So we're going to start with the female. So here's the female reproductive system, looking at it from a lateral view, cut through the inside. So way back here is the ovaries, so that's going to be where the eggs are produced and then released. Then it will travel down your fallopian tube, which is that tube right there, and then it will enter into the uterus. Your uterus will be further divided into three sections: the fundus, the body, and the cervix. The cervix is the very bottom, which will open up into the vaginal canal or the vagina. If you look at, so those are the internal structures. Kind of looking more at the external structures, there is your urethra right here, which is going to be the opening that will lead to, or the tube that will lead up to your urinary bladder, where urine will end up being released. There is the clitoris, which is going to be right in front, and the mons pubis, which is the fleshy mound of tissue that's right above the pubic bone. The clitoris is going to play a role in sexual pleasure. And then you have two folds of skin, the labia majora and the labia minora, and both of these, so the majora is going to be right there on the outside and the minora will be on the inside. And their purpose is going to be basically to protect that vaginal and urethral openings. So if we were to take a look at these from a frontal view, you can see here, again, the uterus. So here is the ovary, and here is the fallopian tube. There are these finger-like projections that kind of surround the ovary and connect the ovary with the uterine tube. Those are called the fimbriae. Once that egg ends up being released into that fallopian tube, it will go into the uterus. So the top, very top part or anterior part of the uterus is called the fundus. The middle portion is the body, and then this bottom section is the cervix. Your uterus is divided into three tissue layers or linings. The perimetrium is going to be the outermost lining of tissue. The myometrium is going to be the middle, and the endometrium will be the layer of tissue on the very inside. And then down here will be the vagina. So looking at some of the functions of these particular structures, you can see here that the function of the labia majora and minora is to protect the urethral and the vaginal openings. And then, like I said, that mons pubis, which wasn't really diagrammed on the diagrams that we just went through, but this is this fleshy mound that's just right in front of the pubic bone, and it's going to play a role in cushioning during sexual intercourse. And then the last external structure was the clitoris, which, like I mentioned, is a nerve ending that aids in sexual pleasure. The ovary is the egg-producing organ, and it's going to be where the egg will develop into a mature oocyte and then be released into the fallopian tube, which is basically a pathway for the egg to travel towards the uterus. The uterus is a place for fetal development. This is going to be where the oocyte, the fertilized egg, the zygote, will embed itself into the endometrium and then be nourished and continue to grow, for 9 months until birth occurs. And then the cervix, like I said, is the very bottom part, posterior part of the uterus, that will eventually dilate during childbirth to allow the baby to enter into the vaginal canal and then out. So those are the reproductive organs of the female. We also are going to look at the structure of the breast because it's also going to play an important role in terms of milk production. You can see here the outside structures, which are going to include the areola and the nipple. And then inside, there are going to be these alveolar glands and then the lactiferous ducts. So the alveolar glands are going to be the site of milk production and storage. This will all be controlled by hormone activity after pregnancy. The lactiferous ducts are going to be those passageways that will carry the milk from the gland to the nipple, and then the nipple will be where that milk will end up exiting. The areolar areola is going to contain small oil glands, and their job is to produce this oily substance to prevent chafing during breastfeeding. So those are the structures and the basic functions of the female reproductive system. So let's now move on to male reproduction. So male reproduction is going to begin, most of the activity is going to be here in the testes, which is going to sit in this sac called the scrotum. The testes is going to be where sperm production occurs and where sperm will not only be produced, but they will kind of be stored in there, allowing them to mature. The sperm then goes into this epididymis region, this coiled up area. So the area in the testes where sperm are produced are called the seminiferous tubules. And so then the sperm will go into this epididymis where they will sit and they will mature. The sperm then is going to go out this long tube, which is called the vas deferens or the ductus deferens. And it will end up going back down behind, and it will cross into a couple important glands: the prostate gland, the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland, which is also called your Cowper's gland. And these are going to be responsible for adding to the sperm different kinds of chemical compounds, which are going to create what we call semen. So these are going to be glands that are going to put these different chemicals into that tube to mix in with the sperm that has been formed. And the purpose of that fluid is to make it easier to pass through the tubes. There's chemicals in there that nourish the sperm and feed them so that we're taking good care of them. And then once that sperm comes down, it will then enter into the penis. Inside the penis, there are two layers of erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum. The spongiosum is the inside layer, and there's actually two of it. It's going to surround the urethra. So the urethra is going to attach, not only does the urethra move or transport urine in a male, but it's also going to transport the semen. And the corpus cavernosum is going to be that top layer of erectile tissue. At the bottom of the penis then is the glans penis, which is the sensitive area here, and then sperm would then be ejaculated out the urethral orifice. We actually name the urethra based on where it's sitting. So there's a penile section of urethra, so that's your part of this urethra that's in the penis, and then there's a prostate urethra, and that's going to be the part that actually crosses the prostate gland. So those are the general structures of the male reproductive system. If we were to kind of get an up-close picture of the testes, again, this diagram is not in your packet, but it's kind of interesting to see. We have, like I mentioned, all these seminiferous tubules. This is going to be where sperm is produced and sperm is stored. And then there's this epididymis, which again, is just lots and lots of coiled up tubes. And this is going to be where the sperm is actually going to be mature, to have the time to mature. And the spermatic cord is going to be this cord here, this section right above, the testes that will then lead to the vas deferens. So looking at some different functions, the functions of the testicles are going to be, this is where the sperm is going to be created, and the epididymis is going to be where those sperm cells will actually mature. The vas deferens is a tube that's going to connect the epididymis to the ejaculatory ducts, so it's just going to be a carry the sperm. The seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the Cowper's or the bulbourethral glands are all going to produce fluid that will become semen or seminal fluid. So the prostate specifically produces fluid that transports and nourishes the sperm. The Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland is going to secrete lubricating mucus prior to ejaculation, and all of those things will mix in with the fluid from the seminal vesicle and the sperm to make semen. The urethra is a tube that connects the bladder to the body, and also is the sperm. It's also going to carry the sperm. So like I mentioned, there's the prostatic urethra, which crosses the prostate gland, and then there's the penile urethra, which is the section of the urethra that's in the penis. Erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum, there's 2 lateral columns of tissue, and then the corpus spongiosum, which is 1 layer that will actually just have the urethra sit right inside. And then the glans penis is at the end of the penis. It contains lots of different nerve endings. So the pathway, just to kind of review, the sperm goes from testes, the sperm is produced, it goes to the epididymis, where it matures, then the vas deferens, crosses through the seminal vesicle, the ejaculatory ducts, the prostate gland, the urethra, and then is expelled from the body. Looking specifically at a sperm and the structure of the sperm, so here's a sperm. It's kind of divided into a tail, a head, a midpiece, and a tail. The head contains the nucleus of this cell. It is a cell. And then the acrosome is the very front part, and that's going to contain lysosomes to kind of help the sperm make its way to where it needs to go. The mid piece is right here. It's going to contain lots of mitochondria so that the tail, because this tail or the flagellum needs to whip back and forth for the sperm to move, we need to have this mitochondria available so that the cell has enough energy for that transporting function. Moving on to some histology. If we look at some histology, it's looking specifically at the testes. Here's the section that's showing testes. This whole section right here is a seminiferous tubule, and these different cells that are in here are the interstitial cells, which is going to be where we call them Leydig cells, is going to be where testosterone is going to be produced. And then you can see here on these different diagrams the different stages that sperm is in as they grow, develop, and mature. So we've got primary spermatocytes and secondary spermatocytes and spermatids. So these are just going to be different. You kind of think about it in terms of, you know, being a toddler and then being a child and then being a teenager and then being an adult. Same thing with sperm and egg cells, quite honestly. They have this period of maturation where they become more complex and more advanced as they mature before they become a final mature sex cell. And then here's showing you an ovary. So typically for ovary development or for oocyte development, again, just like with the testes and like I mentioned, just looking at like a lifespan, there's a period of maturation for an egg cell or an oocyte. So here's this diagram is kind of explaining you go from a primary follicle, which is going to contain the primary oocyte, and then it matures into a secondary follicle, which contains a secondary oocyte. And then it's going to continue into tertiary structures until eventually we end up with a mature oocyte. So here's an example showing you a primary follicle. So you can kind of see that layer of cells that's surrounding the oocyte, the primary or the immature oocyte. And then you also have the secondary follicle, and you can tell the difference because the secondary follicle is a lot thicker. Sorry, my dog's barking. And it's going to surround the secondary oocyte. So if we moved forward, we would be able to see a tertiary one, which would have even more of a follicle around it, around a tertiary oocyte, and eventually we would have a mature oocyte cell. So that's what it would look like if we looked at an ovary underneath a microscope. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a fantastic day.